Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the town hall here in Little Canada tonight. My name is Peter Fischer. I'm the state representative for 44A. That covers the entire community of Little Canada and also covers most of Maplewood, and that would be Maplewood basically north of Maryland. So if you're familiar with Maplewood, that's a big chunk of Maplewood. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be out here this evening. I want to say a special thank you to the City of Little Canada for hosting us tonight. I'd like to thank the city manager, Bryce Sheridan, and Laura Linehan for helping set this up to make sure that we're all set to go. And also we have the couple of folks from the city government here. If they'd like to stand up, I know that we've got Tom Fisher, the mayor, who's here in the back. Thank you, Mayor. We've got Angela Malone over here on the left, and then, or my left, your right, and then Chris Kopik over here, who's on the city council. Thank you, folks, for being here and offering us the use of your facilities. It's great to be in different locations across the district when we have our meetings. First thing I would like to do is be able to start off with everyone being able to have a chance to introduce yourselves, who you are. What I'd like to know is your name and what city you're in, so that we can kind of have an idea of where folks are from the area. So if we'd like to, Carla, would you like to start on this side here?
Sure, Carla Nelson from Maplewood. Hello.
Okay, and then we'll go over here.
Keith Brown, I know you, I went to high school with you.
Okay, well, thank you.
I live here in Maplewood on Lake Jarvis.
All right. Super, well, thank you for being here, appreciate it.
Mark Thompson, Maplewood.
Ann Cleland, Maplewood.
Melissa Bershon, Little Canada.
David Johnson, Little Canada.
Karen Johnson, Little Canada.
Linda Funk, Little Canada.
Okay.
Laura, City, Little Canada. Angie, Little Canada.
Chris, Little Canada.
Susan Montgomery, Little Canada.
Bryce Sharon, City Administrator. Tom Fisher, Mayor of Little Canada.
Philip Rancevich, Maplewood.
And Xander Jamison-Zelli, Peter Campaign Manager,
And then the back is,
Chris Waldorf, I'm representing Fisher's assistant.
all right, thank you. And I know we've got some other folks coming in. As they get signed in there, they'll take their seats here. I want to say thank you for the opportunity. Want to start off with, first of all, a real quick recap. It has been a little bit of a tough summer. I want to say, first of all, thank you, everyone who had reached out. We went through quite a bit of trauma with the assassination of our leader in our caucus, with the Hortman family, the attacks on the Hoffman family, and the attempted attacks on Ann Rest and Kristen Bonner. It was a very sobering event to go through. I want to say that our sheriff in the county here did a great job of reaching out, making sure that things were coordinated and for people coming together. But more importantly, the love and the support that I felt from people in the area really helped us through a very trying time, and is in some ways going to change how we do things going forward in terms of security at the Capitol. When you have one-off lone attacks, it's really hard to prevent against those. But what's more important is for the community coming together and unified, saying we reject political violence. It has no place in our society. And I want to say thank you to everybody who reached out and amplified that message. That means a lot. Some of the things for this past session, I'm sorry, I've got my little list, so I'm trying to make sure I don't miss too much as I go through here. This past session, I was co-chair of the Environment Committee. We are in a very unusual situation, is that for only the second time in state history, we had tied power in the House of Representatives. And so with a 67-67 tie, we ended up with a power sharing agreement where we split when we had the equal number of people in the chamber, we had split sharing of all the committees, except for the fraud committee. Fraud committee, there was only the Republicans running that one, and they had the majority on it. Otherwise, everything was split even Steven. We were able to get a lot of work done. Being in the environment world, the previous 2 years I had been in the Human Services as chair of the Human Services Policy Committee. There's a big difference between human services and in the environment. In the human services, there's lots of common ground of working on things, helping our most vulnerable people out there. Not quite as much common ground in the environment world. And what was nice is that I will say that my co-chair, who was a Republican, was Josh Heisman from northern Minnesota. He ran a very respectful meetings as we did. We spent a lot of time, at least once a week, well, geez, more than once a week. We were getting together and talking about what was going to be on the agendas, making sure everybody had enough time for presentations, were there any things that we needed to be ready for, and kind of letting folks know where the hot points might be, where the quiet points might be, so that we could get things done, make sure that everybody had the time to be heard, and make sure that we were conducting the meetings in a respectful way. And what I want to say is that by doing that, when we got to our final negotiations with the Senate, there were some things in the bill that I was a little uncomfortable on, and there were some things in the bill that we had in our presentation that the Republicans were a little uncomfortable on, but we were able to say, you know what, this is something that we need to do for both sides. And I was advocating just as strongly for the Republican position with our Senate counterparts to make sure that we could, because that's the House position, and we strongly supported that. And so when we got done, we had a bill that was very well received. When it came off the House floor, it had 126 out of 134 people voting for it. So that is the kind of thing, and that kind of also builds on what I try to do when working at the Capitol. The preceding years when I had been in charge of the Human Services Policy Committee, when my Human Services bill would come for the final votes on the House floor, I had 100% support of both Republicans and Democrats. And a lot of it is taking the time to make sure that people are being heard, getting time to ask the questions. Doesn't mean we agree on everything, but it's making sure that people are treated with respectfully in the process. And I try very hard. I'm not always successful. I will apologize when I get it wrong, but I want to make sure that people are making sure that their voices aren't being left behind. And I find when we do that, we're able to get a lot more done for the people in our state. And when I take a look at what we were able to do, particularly over the years in the behavioral health world, people have addiction issues, people have got mental health issues, that worked very well. And as a matter of fact, when we started session, the first bill that was heard in the Human Services Committee was a mental health bill that I had done in joint with Don Gilman, who is Republican from to the west of us, and we co-presented that bill. Both of us were at the table, and I felt very strongly on that. And the same thing in the environment. There were a lot of times where Josh Heisman and myself, not on every bill, but on several major bills, that we were co-authors of the bills. Sometimes he would present and sometimes I would present. And that's because more often than not, there's a lot more that we agree on than that we disagree on. And it's just trying to find that and then be able to have good, respectful discussions from there. So I'm really proud of that. And some of the things that we were able to get done in those areas, as we heard in the human services area, we had a lot that was happening in the mental health area. And we were able to, while we had a tighter budget this year, we were able to find some ways to allow a little bit more money to help fund some of those areas out there, particularly when we get into mental health in schools, et cetera. And a lot of things that we focused on was what are we doing to help streamline things out there. So part of the mental health bill we had was helping streamline the process, finding out what are things that we can take out of the way that were regulations that we had years ago that we no longer needed. So trying to take paperwork out of the way that was not really necessary, or giving more time for it to be filled out so that people who had could spend that time initially meeting with people who needed mental health services. We looked at the same thing. In the environment world, one of the big things that we dealt with was permitting reform. You know, people always get real nervous in the House on that because people take a look, are you weakening the law so it makes it easier for people to pollute without accountability? And the big thing that I was always hearing from the Republicans, it's more about what are we doing for efficiency so that we don't have to wait forever to get our bills, to be able to get our permits out there. Part of it is taking a look at what is the root cause causing the permitting to be held up. And that's one of the things that we spent a bit of time on. We've not got the full answer on it because this is since I've been in, this is the third time we're coming back for permitting reform. And part of it is which means we've not identified fully what that root cause is out there. Part of the root cause is, in some of the reports we saw, not enough staffing out there. So what we've done is we provided for extra staffing out there. It's things that everyone strongly agrees on.
Quick question, when you're talking about permit, you're talking for mental health services, permitting to get.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for asking, Carla. Great question. You were asking, is it permitting for mental health services? I'm sorry. I'm switching back into the environment world. This is permitting for MPCA has got permitting out there for companies when they're putting discharges out into the environment, whether it's air, noise, water. those are things. So thank you, great question. On top of it, the other thing that we were also looking at is in the DNR. DNR does water permitting, and one of the things that's been holding that up for quite a while is they haven't had enough people to do that. Part of that is paid for by the fees that we charge. We haven't had an increase in those fees in over 10 years. And so we did, which, met with some consternation from the conservative side, but all those dollars went into providing additional manpower so that we could process those permits faster. In the MPCA side, one of the things that we were finding out is as we're dealing with it, they're able to identify, what is causing the permits not to be done in a timely manner. The big one that we saw right offhand was not having enough buddies. But the other thing that we were finding out there is there were a lot of them that were kind of like a catch-all. And when I started asking questions about what is this catch-all, so often it came down to it was people outside of either the MPCA that they were waiting for information from, or people that were like third parties that were getting things for like the cities or the businesses. Because when permits are presented, questions come up, and sometimes it takes a while for the answers to get back and forth. So we're trying to spend more time to figure out what are some of the hangups in those areas, what can be done to help make sure that when businesses are wanting to get set up in the state, that we're providing things in an efficient way so they can get the answers as quickly as possible. So those were some of the bigger things that we were looking at. And at that point, I will stop there because I know there's some questions. I know that there were a number of questions that people had sent in. And then, so what I'm going to do is, I've got a list of them here, and what I'm going to do is go through the first, and some people submitted more than one question. So what I'll do is I'll go through, so everyone gets one. Those who've submitted more than one, I'll take the first one that came in on the timestamp, and then we'll go to the audience here, and then we'll come back for the other questions that I've got here. So that's the way we'll kind of set it up. What I will do as people are asking the questions from the audience, what I'll want to do is make sure I understand it, and I'll repeat it because this is being broadcast live, and people may not be able to hear the questions from there, so I'll repeat it so that people watching online will be able to hear what the questions are. So I will say thank you, and we'll go through it. The first question that I've got here, I'll be reading them word for word. Doesn't mean I agree with all the verbiage on these, but I'm going to read them the way I received them through here. The first one I have is, why are Democrats so fiscally irresponsible? The raising of the budget in 2023 was ridiculous. Now we face a possible deficit. Why was this raised so much? To pay for illegal aliens and other non-essential reasons? Pet projects? Also, why did the state of Minnesota give illegals driver's licenses? Now they can vote because one has to be a legal resident to vote and to get driver licenses, and this makes them appear to be legal when they are not legal. Once again, I'm saying I'm reading these word for word. Does not mean I agree with the wordage here, but I want to make sure that the people who ask the questions are getting their things out using the verbiage that they had. So as I tackle through, there's a lot there. In terms of the raising the budget in 2023, one of the things that we also did was change how the budget forecasts are done. Up until 2023, we did not account for inflation when we were doing it on the expense side of the statement. So one of the things that we passed in 2023 is when forecasts are done going forward, that besides factoring in inflation when we're doing the revenue side, we also have to provide for what does inflation look like on the expense side. Now, I will say, while we have that provision, they have to recognize inflation, that does not mean that the inflation is booked at that point in time. Those inflationary numbers still have to be approved by the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then finally by the governor. So while the forecast will show deficits, there's a line item that they have in there now on the forecast that says inflationary increase. And what that inflationary increase is are the increases that they see that have not been approved by the legislature. So when we were going into the last legislative session, we were looking at about a $5.5 billion deficit over the 4-year situation. When you take the inflation forecast out of there, that came down to about a break even, not completely, but pretty close. And so when we were doing our budgeting this year, one of the things that we did is we did not authorize all the inflationary spending for each of the different agencies. All the agencies made the requests. In a number of areas, they received the request, but the request did not cover all of their inflationary needs. And then as we were going out in the second year, that's some things that we changed. Some of the things that we changed is we tweaked some of the formulas that we had out there so that some of the increases that might be coming down the road were not we took down and ratcheted a little bit. Some of the other things that are factored in there is, where we are spending the money. So as we got done, when we finished the legislative session, we were sitting at the end of the 4 years, instead of a deficit that would have been about 5.5 billion, we were sitting around 200 to 300 million at that point in time. Now, as part of that, there was still approximately $2.5 billion of inflationary dollars that were still left in. So when you take that into account, if you were to take that out, we'd be looking at a surplus, which is the way the budget used to be done before 2023. So what we're trying to do is recognize we've got the inflation in. Inflation is not approved. That still has to go through the process. So those are the kind of things that are still part of the cycle as we go. So we're still going to see that in future forecasts. We're going to see that inflationary part, and that inflation part will grow in the future. Now, that's a little different than the other parts of the core budget where things might be approved going forward and is part of what they call the fixed part of the budget. And I'll use an example of that is in the education area. They take a look at what the number of students are going to be. So if they're forecasting more students in the future, that becomes part of the base budget. That is something that happens automatically and is figured in there. And the only way that would change is that we would have to go in legislatively and say, well, we're not going to cover those extra students. So that would take a action by the legislature and the governor to say we're not going to fund them. Where on the inflationary side, it takes action for us to fund that. So I just kind of want to draw that and use that as a little bit of an education of how the budget part of it works. So I will stop in that part because there's other parts that he wants to bring up in here, so I'll get through. So in terms of the question was raised, why was this raised so much? A lot of it was making up for funding formulas in the past. And when I say funding formulas, some of it was in the education area where over the years, as I had mentioned, we've had the number of students go up, but we haven't always had the base rate that we have for funding go up at the inflationary part. And so one of the things that we did is said, automatically going forward, there will be a 2% inflationary factor in there. Now, most of us see inflationary is actually higher than that. So that's one of the things that we've built some of that in instead of having to come back every year. Now, we can always, as the future legislature, decide at some point we don't do that. It could be next year or the following year we could come back and say we're not going to do the inflationary thing, but it would take an action of us to be able to say that's not going to happen versus an action to make it happen. So those are type of things that are set up in the process. Big areas where we had additional spending was in the human services area. We had a lot of extra spending, nursing homes, assisted living, personal care attendants. Some of those areas we were paying quite low, and in many areas, and this still haunts us in some of the human services area, we've not done increases on the base rates in 10 or 15 years. And part of that is when we don't factor inflation in. So if you're a service provider that's providing personal care attendants, that base rate had stayed the same for many years. Some of the base rates that we pay for the county for providing case management services have been at the same level for 10, 15 years. They're still sitting at some of those areas, and that's some of the problems that we hear back from the counties saying, why aren't you increasing them? Well, inflation eats everything across the board. So those are some of the things in there. Some things that we fund, some people find are not essential. Other people say, well, it is essential for us. So it comes to where you take a look at. Some people may say, well, that's a service I'm not going to use. I don't think it's important. Other people say it is. This is where we get some of that conflict. And so we're going to have that no matter what. When we have cuts out there, some people say that's a good place to cut. And other people are going to say, no, you're causing pain along that. But we have to make those tough choices. And that's sometimes what happens. So it comes down to a perspective is what people are hearing, what people are feeling, et cetera. Also, the next thing that was brought up was about the driver's licenses. And it said driver's licenses because you have to be a legal resident to vote. Actually, I want to clarify, it's not a legal resident. You can only vote if you're a U.S. citizen, number one. And in terms of being a U.S. citizen, not all U.S. citizens are able to vote, depending where they are in the criminal justice system or in competency hearings and everything else. So there are other things out there. Just because you have a driver's license doesn't mean you're entitled to vote because you have these other qualifications that are out there. You have a question, sir? Yes.
About the driver's license, there was another law that was passed the same year that said that as soon as you
citizen supposed to just trust someone that comes over across our border without our knowledge, undocumented, ends up in Minnesota, decides to get a driver's license, we're supposed to trust they're gonna check that box? Because I think there's a new investigation coming out that might be showing some numbers that might scare a few people, because I've been researching that part of it. It seems that we have a lot of undocumented, people here that have voted in our elections. And that really is not fair to Minnesota citizens. So why were those two laws? Because I saw when the first law came out that undocumented workers, people get driver's license. I thought that was pretty wild, and I don't agree with that at all. And then shortly after, the other law come out where you're gonna be automatically registered to vote, and that was the 16 age law that let even 16-year-olds will automatically register to vote. They can't vote till they're 18. But I'm like, well, now that name's on the voter roll. So we're just confusing that even more.
All right, and I'll try to summarize getting to the core here because I don't think people listening online will caught everything. Basically, the focus is that with the people who are undocumented getting driver's licenses, at the same time there was a law passed that when people apply for driver's licenses, they're automatically, if they check the box, can be enrolled as on the voter rolls. And wondering what is the double check going on, that seems like there's concern there. I do know that the Secretary of State was in a meeting last week. There was a House hearing on this, that this was discussed a little bit. And they go through and do a comparison back and forth to take a look and to verify. They've got different things to verify to see, are these people indeed U.S. citizens or are they not? They have additional checks that are in there. What those all are, I don't know. I didn't listen to the entire hearing, but there are different things in place. I hear your concerns on and want to acknowledge that the Secretary of State has heard those and has things in their place that they have. Now, when people, as you say, they have to first of all check a box saying that they are a U.S. citizen before they can vote. So they are committing fraud at that point in time. That's one of the things that leads to automatic people being exported out of the country at that point in time. But I hear your concerns, and that is the answer to them.
Well, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
It might just be nice
Could-
just to have a mark on the driver's license. It just seems very, very odd that we wouldn't make some identifying mark, because I'm a poll judge, and that's all you need is a driver's license to vote. So it would have been very helpful just to have some kind of emblem on there or something to say non-citizen.
The question that's coming up is, why can't we have another mark on there, whether the person is a citizen or not? And there's several things that go into it, is that it's not just a driver's license that you can use for photo ID. If you do another set of documents out there, you can use your photo ID from your high school, you can use your photo ID from college. We don't have those marks on any of those situations either, whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. Just because you're a U.S. citizen doesn't automatically get to vote. We have a number of people who are here in this country who are here with green cards, et cetera, where they have driver's licenses. So we already have a number of people who are not U.S. citizens who have these documents. That is a policy decision that is one of those things that will continue to be debated in the future going forward.
Okay, well, just so you know where we sit on it.
No, and I appreciate that. All right. Let's see. I think I caught everything on there. Next question I have is, what is being done ahead of time before the president before our president sending the military into Minnesota? Once again, I'm just reading these the way the words are here. And I'll have you note that that sometimes people are doing this by email or by voice. So coming in, while the words may be a little bit off, it may be just a translation thing. So I don't want to, and that's why I'm not using names, because I don't want to embarrass anyone with the way the wording is here. What is being done right now, that what is happening out there is that there are some states where we know that the president wants to send the troops in, and what's happening is that's going through the legal systems in those states. I know that if that were to occur in our state, number one, the governor can always request. So if the governor would request for federal troops in, that is always a possibility. If the president was to want to send troops in without the request of the governor, that is something that the Attorney General's office would be dealing with. From my understanding, the Attorney General's office is already preparing for that situation. So that's how that would play out. That would be up to the courts. I know that in several instances, the courts have already ruled against the military being deployed, but it also comes down to each individual circumstance as we go forward. Next one I have, this one's going to be a longer one here again, so this one I may have to come back to a little bit. Property taxes have increased disproportionately over the last few years. One of the things that could help is increasing the homestead credit. The homestead credit cap has not been increased with property values. How can we go about getting these more aligned with current values? That is an excellent question. And part of it is because it is somewhat complicated is there are so many things that go into the property tax formula. Is that while we have the homestead credit out there, we determine that in the state, but the homestead value, the tax values get impacted by several different things. Number one, your market rate is established by an assessor, so that has an impact on it. The other thing that can have an impact on it is development within your communities. If you've got a community that's got a lot of new construction going on, you've got new construction going in. As a result, property taxes go up, and sometimes that offsets things. So sometimes we have those kind of things happen. Likewise, the opposite can happen. If you've got a major employer that pulls out and all of a sudden you got vacant land, that property value drops substantially. So all of a sudden the burden in that community and those communities sharing that, the school district, the county, all of a sudden those taxes that were being collected there, because you no longer have the value, now they get spread out amongst everybody else's remaining there. So those are things that impact it. So there's several different things. Another thing that can impact it is also what we do for tax policy at the state level, is because when taxes are applied, they use a formula out there. And the formula recognizes the homestead at one level, businesses, commercial at another. So there's different classifications. And so what happens is, like if the city of Little Canada decides, and these are not the real numbers, so please don't get alarmed at them. Say if they've got $10 million that they want to assess for the coming year, and they're taking a look, okay, and it was $10 million the preceding year. Well, if the coming year all of a sudden we tinker with the formula to make it less taxes going on businesses, well, the city's still going to need that $10 million. They're still going to levy that $10 million, same as the previous year. But if all of a sudden the tax rate at the state level has changed, so all of a sudden instead of the rate being a factor of 2 for commercial and businesses goes down to 1.5, well, that means everybody else ends up having a larger property tax increase because now they start sharing in that $10 million because less is being paid by the ones in the others. Yes, sir.
But I think the question goes to the rates keep going up and up and up and up, and both in previous years, especially single-family houses have gone up a lot, and property taxes have gone up even more. And like to your point of, especially this last couple of years, commercial values have gone down, and now the cities are expecting us to float that bill, and we can't.
Okay.
It's just too much. Is there a way we can tie how much they can raise the property taxes to an average value of the house, or tie that homestead credit to an average value of the house? Because that's something that can get us a real, for a single family house specifically, because nobody else has this homestead credit. So we could tie that to an average value, and that way you wouldn't have to talk about it anymore, because it's all tied to the value of the home. So if it goes up, it goes up. If it goes down, it goes down.
Okay, the question that's coming up is asking, can't we just make it tied to the average value of the house so that the rates aren't always going up year after year? Now, this is getting a little bit outside my area. I'm more in the human services environment area. So I'm not going to be able to fully answer that. And Chris, can you make a note on that one? And if you can get your information to Chris back here, we can get some more information. I will say that one of the things that will have an impact on that is that, going back to the example I used, if you've got $10 million that's going to be assessed out there, as you try to balance them, that would mean then that the city would have to cut things to get things equated out. So that what you're saying is that then the city would have to give up things that they're doing.
The second half of my question is we need to make the cities and county governments more fiscally responsible so they can know how much they can raise it. Because it's been raised year after year after year. We're on year number 5 of our property taxes being increased. And there's nothing to say that they can't just keep going or even how much they can go up by.
And we have a vote December 4th that it's gonna increase again 1% of your property value if you don't say no,
Well,
so.
that's 63 school district, I'm running for school board, and yeah, they're definitely, they're looking at raising it a bunch. If you're in Maplewood, North St. Paul, or Oakdale.
So not just the school districts, but the
Right.
counties and the state all raising it at the same time. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's crushing, and then so we would expect then the state to help us out by saying, hey, local governments, there's a cap. You can't go beyond the cap, and I know there's a 10%, if it raises by 10%, we get a rebate, but that's, that still maybe means it raised more than 10%, and then the next year's raise is on top of that 10%.
And I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. At the same time, not everybody is able to hear it here. So I also got lots of questions. As I said, what we'll do is, get some more information. I will say that in terms of limiting what cities could do, I'd be very hesitant. I would not feel comfortable myself voting for something like that, just knowing the impact that it can have on local governments of what they can provide in basic services. And what I'm doing is just responding back to the question you answered. I don't want to get any further, but just saying, here's where I am. You asked the question. I'm letting you know where I stand on that. So very, very quickly.
I just want to ask, is people in the government like yourself, legislators, are they concerned about a bigger societal crisis, which would be people losing their homes all over the place? Because that's what I'm starting to see. And so this is an important question, because if it doesn't have a limit, then people start losing their homes, then private ownership of homes is going away in America, and that's the American dream, right? So I think it's a very important thing to look more into. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So with that, we'll move on to the next. There's a second half of the question. I think this is the one that you're asking here. Can it be possible to make a law capping the increase in property taxes across the city, county, and school districts? Right now, they all evaluate their budgets separately, not considering each other's increases. All three are set to increase from your district by, again, disproportionate amount. And, as I've mentioned, I'd be very hesitant to limit that. And as an example I'll use is the cuts that we've got coming down from the federal government. We take a look at what's going to happen in Ramsey County here, and even on the state level, is we lose a lot of funding that's coming down that supports positions, and also the positions out there for doing services. You'll see that one of the new things that the state and the counties have to do is for Medicaid and for Medicaid-funded services, that instead of certifying once a year, you now have to certify twice a year. So that doubles workloads. No dollars come through for that. So the county's going to have to hire extra people to do that work, which leads to extra expenses out there. So this is also some things why I'd be hesitant, because sometimes we mandate things out there, and I'll admit it, from the state side, we don't always put the funding to go with it as it comes across the board. And so these are the type of things why I'm hesitant, because we have these things, and also from the federal government. They come down from the federal government. So those are the things that go into both sides of the equation. All right. Next one. The federal government has expressed its intention to fast-track environmentally dangerous sulfide ore copper mining just upstream of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. If this happens, Minnesota is the last line of defense. How will the legislature step up to prevent this particular mining on the doorstep of the Boundary Waters and protect our clean water? This is one that I've been dealing with, is something that I've been dealing with for even before I was co-chair of the Environment Committee. And this is also something I've been in contact with Betty McCullum's office. First of all, there may be nothing that we can do to stop it. And the reason I say that, if the president says that these are for national security purposes, and plays that out. Of course, in the courts, we would fight that in the courts. The Attorney General would file an appeal on it, as are other groups. But if we lose that in the courts, they can give out the permits and they could start mining even in the Boundary Waters or Voyageurs National Park. The things that we have on our side is currently we have a lot of laws that are set up out there for permitting right now. The number one thing that I take a look at that we have a responsibility as the state is protecting our waters out there and our air. And more importantly, one of the guiding things that I use when we take a look at protecting our waters is we have a responsibility through our treaty rights that gave us the right to be able to inhabit this state and to vote in this state, is to allow the native tribes that we have 11 of them in our state here, to be able to still have hunting, fishing rights, and gathering rights within our state. One of the things that has been highlighted is the gathering of Menomin. Wild rice, or Menomin as most of the native tribes call it, and for them that is a sacred rice. So one of the things that we have is protecting those. We have what is called a sulfite standard out there, and that is one of the things that is very important for us to protect as we go forward, and one of the things that when we've been restoring waters in our state, that we take care to make sure that where there used to be historically wild rice growing, that we're protecting those waters from the sulfites in the past and cleaning them up. One of the big examples of an area that we've done a lot of cleaning up of is the St. Lawrence River as it comes through in Duluth up there. We've done great work in conjunction with the federal government, taking the historical contamination that used to be out there from the heavy industries and cleaning it out, or encapsulating, or we did not remove it, and wild rice is starting to grow back in those waters again. And the local tribes up there are starting to harvest again. So those are one of the things that we take a look as we're addressing those.
Isn't there a bill, hasn't it been talked about in the legislature trying to make sure that if sulfide mining is ever allowed in this state, that the foreign mining companies that largely do this work would have to first put up a pile of money in order to clean things up? Because so many of these companies just disappear after 20 years and the state taxpayers are left with all the cleanup and the destroyed environment.
Okay, the question is, now I'm repeating it, so if I get anything wrong, and I'm going to kind of summarize it a little tighter, is there been a bill out, isn't there a bill out there that makes sure that we have protections out there so that if the mining that causes sulfide to be released into the waters occurs, what is being done to protect it? What are the financial assurances that are going to be required of the companies that they would set aside to start with to make sure that if damage occurs, that there will be the dollars out there to make sure that it's covered and it's not the taxpayers who have to take care of it? And where that would be in reference to is that some of the copper mining that's being proposed in northern Minnesota, the waste piles would be out there, and some instances are saying they would be causing potential contamination issues for 500 years. They're using earthen dams out there, and there's not a lot of earthen dams that have lasted 500 years. So, as a matter of fact, we've had some of the taconite tailings ponds that are done by earthen dams up there that have failed since I've been in office and wiped out different parts of the state. I know in one part they wiped out a trail, and we had to spend a couple $1 million to replace the trail out there. It came out of taxpayers' dollars because the mining company no longer was in existence. So these are some of the things. So the question that gets raised by this is a legitimate question. Yes, there is a bill out there that would require that to occur, that if a company was going to come in, that they would have to put money off to the side. And there's several versions of it. There's one that requires the money right off the bat. There's another one that would allow them to build a pot of money and use financial instruments going over time. So there's several different versions of that out there. Next question. This is really not a state one, and I think this might actually be a street in Little Canada. So the question is, what is the purpose of making Condit Street no parking? And I think that's a little street over here on the other side of the freeway from what I can recall in the city. I've got no idea, and I don't know if, so I can't answer that. I'm not expecting the city to, but if the city wants to provide an answer, is I can have, because I've got the address, and I can have my staff person get the answer off to them. So I just wanted to let, as you can see, I'm going through every question we get. Not going to expect everything to get answered, but I want to make sure that people are knowing that they're being heard as we go through the process here. Okay, next one. I've been following House File 3130 the Stand Your Ground bill, which would allow law-abiding citizens to defend themselves without a duty to retreat in public spaces. I believe this would strengthen our right to self-defense outside the home or vehicle. Do you support House File 3130 or similar legislation that expands self-defense protections for Minnesotans in public places? I do not. I feel that the current laws that we have out there are adequate and have been proven adequate over the last 150 years. And where I come from on that is so often I've worked in the homeless youth world for 17 years. And one of the things that we work very hard on is doing de-escalation efforts. One of the things that sometimes happens in de-escalation is that when somebody takes a step back, sometimes that takes down the temperature, and instead of having people still at nose to nose, by doing that, that starts de-escalating, and instead of tensions continuing to get worse and escalating to where violence might occur, it allows it to start coming down and people to be able to be a little bit more rational going forward. So as a result, one of the things I look at in my career and things in the past, it still means, though, that people have the right to self-defense. Is if there's nowhere else to back up to, if there's no way to reasonably escape from the situation, you have the right to use deadly force, and that has been done in the state, and people have been protected on that when they've gone through the judicial system. I will zip on to the next question then. Why is the state spending hundreds of millions of dollars in a new house office building when there are empty buildings in downtown St. Paul? I can answer that first of all, from a logistical side of things, is the reason we did not use one of the buildings in downtown St. Paul is that whatever building we use, we're still going to have to outfit. We're going to have to spend a lot of money to refurbish it as we are with the current building. The other thing that I found out that is something that does make a difference is for the way that people interact with government. And one of the things I found out this past year is as the state office building has been under construction, we're over in the Centennial office building. And what I have found is that while it's not that much further away, it makes it much harder for people getting back and forth versus when we were just on top of the Capitol. Is when constituents are going back and forth, is a lot of times not only do they want to see me, they want to see their senator. And so now when you start moving, even though we're like, about a 3/4 block away from where we used to be in the past, it causes another 10 to 15 minutes for people to go back and forth. Now, if we are in downtown St. Paul, somewhere in downtown St. Paul, now you're taking a look at, very easily, you're taking a look at a mile. So if somebody comes and visits me in the office, now they want to go visit their senator. Plus, if they want to come visit me and I'm downtown St. Paul, but it's the same time that I've got to be able to get back up for a meeting up at the Capitol, that gives me less time to be able to meet with people because now I'm running back and forth long distances. And I found that it's the same way as in the Centennial office building. It's a bit further, and sometimes I was just saying, let's just meet right outside the door of the committee meeting room, trying to cut some of those down. But the thing is, there's not the privacy there, and sometimes people want to share things that are not in a very public way because it's very personal, some of the issues that we deal with. And so these are some of the complicating things that go into the equation that we have out there. So these are some of the biggest things. When I looked at it, for me, it was very much a logistical thing, trying to make it easy so that not only could people still get a hold of me, but our senator be able to get over to, if they wanted to see a committee meeting at the same time. So the closer we are together, the more easier it is for people to make sure that they can stay connected with what's going on at the Capitol. Next question. Given the partisan divide of our state legislature, restrictive gun laws are unlikely to be passed anytime soon, despite the tragedy at Annunciation School. What are the chances that our current legislature will repeal the statute known as the preemption law and allow cities more local control over gun regulation? I would say that the likelihood of that is very remote at this point in time. As I mentioned at the start, we have evenly divided government right now in the House, and I don't see any Republican votes for it. So I would say at this point in time, it's not going to happen. And I would say that's why we're not going to have a special session, because there just are not the votes. We need Republican votes to pass some of this. And as of right now, there's a lot of concern from the Republican side, and that just is not going to occur at this point.
Say what their concerns are,
Or summarize
The question being asked is, what are the Republicans' concerns? And the Republicans' concerns are that this is an attack on the Second Amendment. They feel that the Second Amendment is a very pure amendment, and that there should be no regulations on who can own guns and use guns in our state. And they feel that would be a restriction on there that is unacceptable. So I'm just saying, not that I agree with it, but just saying that is their base right on the Second Amendment. And so before I go to second questions here, and I see hands going up around, I've gotten through the first round, and there's people who have asked one question here that I'll come back to if we have time. But I do want to give time for those who are here, and I saw a couple of hands go up. Yes.
Real quick
Good.
on, if you can explain, so I understand, there's a divide on, the gun laws and stuff. What are the current, if you could please explain, what are the current gun laws in place? Because is that one of the sticking points as well? There's enough laws on the books, they have to be enforced, is that one of the sticking points as well, or how does that come into play?
Okay, good question. Is the question that came up, and please correct me if I get this wrong, but I think I'll get it here, is what are the current gun laws on the books right now, and is that there's a feeling that the gun laws are not all being adequately enforced out there right now. And so why would we need more when we're not enforcing ours right now? That is an argument that does come up, is feeling that we should be doing more enforcement out there. I know that comes a lot of times down to charging decisions that we don't have control over. And it is, I will say, it's not unusual that when county attorneys are putting cases together, that they quite frequently will take a look at all the charges out there, and they will not fully prosecute every charge. They will, whether it's on gun laws or any other laws, they will put things off to the side and say, we're only going to charge these couple, we're just not going to charge the rest. And that comes down to based on different consultations. I know that in this county, Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, his office does a very large engagement with the victims out there. Not meaning they, and when I say that is, they engage the victims in the entire process of finding out, and when I say engage in the process, in as much of the process that the victims want to be involved with. In other words, they very much let the victims guide how things go up to a certain point. And what I say that is, they will let the victims decide how much they want to be involved, say in testimony, and also in terms of what restitution should be, in terms of how the crimes, if there was a crime that was done against them, what they'd like to see for an outcome. Doesn't mean that they're always able to get that, but they also get a chance. And so as a result, they have a say in the process as it occurs. And so there's multiple things that go into it. And sometimes there are instances when some items aren't charged, and it may be because the victims are saying there are other things that I'm taking a look at, they've done some other things, and I feel they've done restitution in those areas, or I'd rather focus on this one thing, which was the most grievous, and let the others go off to the side and just focus on this one. So these are the type of things that go into that process, and it also comes down to the evidence that they have. Does the county attorney feel they've got enough evidence to be able to get a conviction on every charge? So those are also other things that go into the process. So there's many things that go into it, and as a result, it's real hard to say,
Right, it's not
let's go.
black and white, and that's why.
Exactly.
I agree with you, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that you work across both parties.
You're welcome.
In the future, something.
No, and thank you for the question. Yes, back in the corner over here.
Well, I watched the news recently and saw our governor, and he's using an assault-type shotgun. There were well over 100,000 shotguns used in Vietnam, and they're very effective. I could wipe this room out with 3 shots. Now, if you want to go out and get everybody's thing that's deemed an assault, you better go after the shotguns.
Okay, and I'll repeat for those online is that one of the things that was in the news recently was the governor out with what was an assault-style shotgun like used to be used in Vietnam, where you could take out, say, everybody in this room with 3 shots, and that if we're taking a look at that, then we should also be considering the assault-style shotguns out there. Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay. So that is what was being done out there. I appreciate you raising that. I'll keep that in mind as I work with my colleagues going forward. All right. Yes, sir. Yes?
Yeah, please correct me if my understanding is incorrect. So we've been working for quite some time, DHS. I believe there are reports coming in with the local news about how a lot of these funds have been, well, misappropriated quite to a significant extent. Do you have and, this is the executive branch, that's, essentially the governor's office working with that money that the legislature gives them. Coming up to the next session, do you have tools to hold that executive branch accountable without just saying, okay, we're gonna give you $5 for this next session because so much of this went to fraud? And as someone who has some experience with government, I know that there are tools in place where they try to prevent this, but it didn't work these last few years.
Okay, so, and if I might miss something here, so please give me the feedback in case I do as I report back, is the core question that's being asked here is, what are the tools out there that can be looked at for the next session to hold things more accountable on the administrative side in regards to dealing with fraud
Yeah, for you as
as a state legislature? Some of the tools that we've had out there are things that we've put in place over the last year or two, is expecting more accountability out there from the Office of the Inspector Generals, making sure that we have more people, making sure that we've got the work being done up front to find out are different organizations financially stable. The big thing that comes in is making sure that the people in the administration are acting promptly and responsively when credible allegations of fraud are coming out and being held accountable. I've heard from people that at times they feel that has not occurred. I do know that there have been people who've been terminated in the process. One of the things that's frustrating is because so many of these are HR issues, they cannot release that information as who the actual individual names are. I do know that there was an assistant commissioner that was terminated in this last go-around. It is frustrating not only from my side, but several of my colleagues who've seen some of this and have gone through the process. I will say where it's also much more complicated is that we also have another thing that's happening on the fraud side is that when we're dealing with it, a lot of it seems to happen sometimes in the human services area. And one of the things that the Republicans had proposed this last time around is in this last session is bringing everything together under one roof. The problem is if we could do that, but if we do that, we don't match the requirements of Medicaid. Medicaid requires a separate Medicaid Office of the Investigator General in Human Services. If you don't, they don't recognize it. They say it's a violation of Medicaid services. Not only do you lose the dollars coming in that supports those efforts, you could lose all your Medicaid dollars. That's about, if I remember right, 10 or 11 billion dollars. And that is all our services for nursing homes, assisted care livings, et cetera. So those are the things that wrap into it. The other thing that comes in, and this has caused some slowness, and when they were closing down some of the places quickly, they were finding instances that there were people that were being serviced by these organizations who were getting legitimate services. And so when they closed down the organization, the people receiving services in some cases ended up out on the street homeless. This is one of the problems that goes in. It's if you cut it off, trying to figure out how you cut it off quickly. So it's trying to find other people, because the last thing you want to do is make people homeless in the process. Or if you've got people receiving addiction services, mental health services, these are the kind of things that spin out in that kind of process. So those are the kind of things that I'm very careful of as we're going through, is making sure that we can move it quickly. The other thing that we also are very careful on is that's happened in the human services world is that when you have allegations of fraud, if you cut off for every allegation of fraud you have out there, there have been some instances where you have the people providing services. It's a very competitive business, for-profit business. And what happens is some of the people take a look, well, if I allege fraud against my competitor, he closes down and I get the business. That has happened in some communities. So this is the other complicating thing that is happening out there, is trying to figure out where is it, where isn't it. Now, I don't want to minimize that There's fraud out there that should have been caught earlier, and no amount of fraud is acceptable at all. Because every dollar we have, first of all, the services we need to provide, we don't have enough money to provide them. We want to make sure that every dollar that we have goes to where it's intended and does not go to waste or fraud. That is something that's very critical for me, having worked in the nonprofit world for years. That's one of the things that I learned very early on. When I was in the for-profit world, was also something very careful. You don't want to lose any dollar because that means that's $1 less of profit on the bottom line. So that's something that I had 35 years of for-profit world, 17 years in the nonprofit, getting it drilled into me. So that is very important to me as we're going forward. Have I totally answered it, or did I miss anything? Okay, you're welcome. Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions out here? Otherwise, I'll go to the next round I've got here. And before I go to you, sir, you already brought up one issue. So what I'll do is I'll go to the second ones here and then come back to you. All right, so the next one I have here. All right. I understand Minnesota has significantly expanded voluntary pre-K programs, adding thousands of new seats statewide. Before supporting this expansion, did you or your colleagues review research on how early institutional education affects the emotional development of 4-year-olds, especially when it involves long hours away from parents? What steps are being taken to ensure parents remain central in early learning decisions? We have expanded funding for early learning voluntary positions in pre-K programs. Now, as it was mentioned, this is voluntary. So some school districts do it. First of all, on school districts, it's voluntary whether school districts do it or not. If they do, there's extra dollars go into it. Furthermore, when it's made available, it's not a requirement that everybody takes advantage of it. So the control is that if a parent doesn't like what's out there, they don't have to enroll their child in any of these pre-K programs. The other thing that goes into it is there's been a lot of research that has been done that in many situations when people are in pre-K, that they come out much more ready for school and are much more successful in school. And particularly in some instances where you've got both parents working in the family, is they aren't always able to be involved as much as they like. And so this helps fill some of those gaps. There's a lot of people out there who provide basic services in our community. I'm thinking of our janitors, our personal care attendants, people working in our assisted living programs, where in many instances we're not paying much above minimum wage. At most, some of these are getting paid $20 an hour. It's not enough to raise a family on. And so these are ways, you've got people working full time. This is a way that if they choose, they can enroll their kids in those programs. All right, then the next one I have is, and I just want to make notes so I make sure I'm not missing anything here or double repeating. Next one I have, when are Democrats going to stop funding illegal aliens and also start to fight criminals instead of coddling them and treating victims like they are, the criminals? I will say on that, in terms of funding, undocumented people are here. The services that we look at is making sure that anyone who comes in the state who's got a legal right to be here is receiving assistance. And one of the things I will mention is that the Human Services Department did over the last couple of years is that people who had pathways to become citizens here entered at the ports of entry, came in, and still had rights to hearings here. And so they worked with those people who came in, and those people were also lined up to help with the workforce shortage that we've had in our nursing homes, in our assisted living situations, as personal care attendants, to make sure that they're receiving the training and assistance and the legal assistance so that they could become productive workers and taxpayers here in our society. Many of the people that are here that are not documented are actually working here. And if you take a look, it's not unusual that many instances in our construction trades, a lot of people providing those services are undocumented. When you take a look in a lot of our meat packing plants, we've had people on our meat packing plants who are documented and had received the documentation authorization to work here, but when the plant closed down and a new owner came in, because those services were tied to the previous owner, they were now considered undocumented and no longer allowed to work here. And so working with those people to go through. So you've got a new business coming in, taking over the same business, but now they don't have a workforce. So jumping through the hoops to make sure that we can get that workforce to get there and assisting those people to stay in those type of situations. The part of the crux of the problem is that many of the jobs that we need to have filled are very manually labor-intensive jobs that are very physically grueling. And most of our society is much older than that. The population that we have are much younger. It's not large enough to do all of these. And that's part of the problem we have, particularly in our rural areas. We don't have enough people to do some of these jobs out there. And that's why we have people coming up and doing the jobs out there. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying these are the facts out here. We need an overhaul of our immigration system to make sure that we can better meet these needs out there and to provide ways for people to be able to come in and provide the jobs out there and fill the jobs in the critical services, taking care of, a lot of times, our most vulnerable people in society. And then that was the end of second ones. I still got third ones to go to, so I'll come back to you over here. Yes, sir.
I've been in communication with your office for a few years concerning the veterans, disabled veterans homestead allocation. And this last session was the 16th year that since it's been adjusted. And the service clubs, I know have been down to the legislature talking to you, but now the highest one is $300,000 for a 100% disabled veteran. That is $90-some thousand under what the cheapest house in Ramsey County sells for on an average. We've been, it's the Vietnam vets are the ones that are getting kicked, just like it was when we came home. And I just don't understand when it's completely to the legislature, nobody else has any opinions to it except we want it, that it's 16 years. Next year, when we do, if you don't do anything, it'll be 17 years since that cap has been raised or the credit on your homestead.
Right, and I'll repeat back to make sure I've got get this right, is that what's being brought up is that it's been 16 years since the property tax exclusion for the amount of the property that gets taxed for veterans who've got, if I remember right, is it all veterans or was it just those with disabilities? 100% disabilities. So this was a cap that was set a number of years ago at 300. So it's 16 years. That is right. It's set at 300. I'm sorry. Thank you. It's set at $300,000.
The right side portion of this audience a while ago was talking about taxes are going up every year.
Yeah.
Well, why hasn't our deduction gone up every year?
Okay.
We're still veterans, we're still disabled.
Right, and it's being mentioned, the veterans are still disabled, they're still here, nothing's been changed, we've had the inflationary pressures, and a lot of that comes down to the legislature. I know there were a number of bills that introduced this past time. Those went through the Veterans Committee and over to the Tax Committee. I did talk to the tax chair and say we need to get something through. It was one of the things, unfortunately, it did not. I know that there's pressure building to continue doing it. I want to say, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. And it's one of the things that I have signed on to the bills that give the best way to address that going forward, and we'll continue to advocate for them. It's something sometimes it just unfortunately takes longer than we'd like to, and I apologize for that.
It's better to say welcome home than thank you for your service.
Okay,
But I never heard welcome home.
well, welcome home. You're welcome. All right. Next question then is going to be the last question that I have here. All right. And it's maybe somewhat similar to one of the earlier ones, but I'll read it through here. It's a little different. With the expansion of the state-funded pre-K programs, I wonder if we're addressing the symptom rather than the root cause. If Minnesota had a cost of living that allowed one parent to stay home and raise young children without financial strain, wouldn't that reduce the need for these programs? Do you believe the legislature is doing enough to support families directly rather than creating systems that seem to squeeze every nickel and dime from taxpayers? It would be great if we were in a situation where we only had to have one person work in the homes. I remember back when I was growing up, that was kind of the way it was. We had very good union-paying jobs. We had very good paying jobs across the spectrum that usually allowed one person to stay at home in most situations and the other person to work. And one of the things that was in there, even back then, people working minimum wage jobs could pretty much come close to being able to do that. However, a lot of those things haven't come up. We have seen things that have changed in our society. We see less union jobs around. We see, in many instances, that minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. We've also seen other pressures come out there, is that when people want to go to work, they also have childcare. There's all these other things that are out there. And so one of the things that we need to do is create a system out there, and what I should do is I should also pause, is it'd be great if everyone we could just have one wage earner each family. I will also say there are some people that they want to have kids and both of them still want to have a career. And so I want to recognize that as one of the things out there. And if people want to both be able to work and have kids at the same time, they should be able to do that. So I do want to be able to put that out there. We should not have to say, only one person can work, the other one has to stay in the home. Getting back to the second part, have we done enough to support families directly instead of creating a system that squeezes every last nickel from taxpayers? There are some things that we've done out there. One of the things that has been very critical is addressing paid family leave, paid family medical leave, giving time for people to take off so that they can have children. Number one, those are some things that we are doing out there. Other things that are being looked at out there is what are we doing to make sure that for those who need childcare, being able to have affordable childcare out there. There's many programs that we're doing out there, credits that we try to do, assistance dollars that we put into private entities to be able to provide childcare across the spectrum. Other things that we are doing out there and addressing is that, and we haven't found the answer on it, is the wage disparities. In this country, we still have wage disparities. When they take a look at common jobs across for people doing the same thing in private industry, white males are still paid more than everybody else for doing the same comparable work. Going down to, and it kind of goes through, then it becomes males versus females. Males get paid more than females. And then it just kind of works its way through. So the people who are in the worst situation for doing the same job are females of color are at the bottom of the scale. So we do have to recognize part of it is we do have these injustices that have occurred out there. That leads to part of the problem that we have, but there's no easy answer to it. In the government situations, that has been somewhat neutralized because in federal government, you go through that regardless of whether you're male or female. If you've got these qualifications, this is what the rate is. In private sector, you don't have that. And also in private sector, it is not unusual when people are doing negotiations based on the surveys that have been done, based on the psychological analysis. It is not unusual that more often than not, women are not as aggressive asking for wage increases as men are. That has an impact on it. I will also say it is also embedded in our society. When I used to work in the private sector, I worked in the hospitality side. And when I was working in St. Cloud, remember hearing the businessmen saying, you know what? They'd sit down and talk about who is going to get paid what between the different companies. And there was a big difference between whether it was male or female. If they're female and they've got a husband at home, we don't have to pay them the same as a guy doing the same job. That's the way things happened in my lifetime. And I'm still sure happening in some situations out there. So over time, these are the things that have an impact overall. Question, sir?
Maybe you can answer this, maybe some local government people can answer this for me. It seems like every cause comes from government taxpayers. Do we look at privatization at all? Is there ever any, hey, we've got too many things on the rolls here. We should look at some privatization. Is there corporations that are willing to take over some part of that? Is that a possibility?
I'll
Look into that at all, or other ways of
we-
funding some of these things? Seems like in Minnesota, we open up to anybody that wants something or needs something, we come.
I will say that in Medicaid services, 87% of the dollars paid out in Medicaid services go to private companies, and private companies are running the system, deciding who's going to receive medical services and who does not. I will say, based on the experiences that I've seen and the instances of what I would call a violation of state statute, I would say that they do not do a very good job. They have, the private companies. I will say that based on experiences I've seen, experiences I've had people in my office complaining about, that when they go to the private companies, what we call managed care organizations, that managed care organizations have, number one, set up a process that they will deny claims. They use what are called AI interfaces. They're supposed to have doctors review whether claims are supposed to be accepted or not. And what happens is they run it through a computer program. The computer program says we shouldn't pay for it, we shouldn't pay for it. In one instance, a person had a slight brain bleed and they needed to get approval. The approval didn't come through and they had a full stroke. Cost them, they lost mobility, they lost other things. I've had people in my office who had missing limbs. One person had a leg was missing, and they had applied to the insurance company to have the limb replaced, and they said that it was not medically necessary to have the leg replaced.
So it comes down to then it's the taxpayer. The privatization's not gonna work. Then
We're
there's
still-
other options.
We're still doing privatization. There are some instances, though, privatization has worked. And what I'll use as the example is that in many instances, some of the demands that we have in government, like Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, where a lot of projects are based on, saying construction. What are the construction contracts for the coming year going to be? When you're doing all the road work out there. A lot of the companies that do that are for-profit companies that they do that work through. So we do a lot of privatization in there. And in the backside, on the state side, the state will also hire contractors sometimes that will do that work for doing the double checking on, because they don't always have the capacity. Department of Commerce goes up and down depending on the cases of fraud. If they've got a lot of people alleging insurance fraud, et cetera, they hire contractors in to fill the extra workload. When the workload goes down, they let it go. So I'm not saying privatization. What I'm saying is privatization is, I don't think, the answer, but there are instances where I think privatization is acceptable, particularly when there are times where you've got instances where we may not have the expertise. Privatization looks like we do contracts with people out there. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes it doesn't work very well at all. So that covers the questions I've got through here. Are there any other questions that people have here before us today? Yes, sir.
Just on the end of mine, can you give me a list of the legislators that are on the committee to decide the veteran exclusion?
I can, yes, as a matter of fact, when we get done, let's connect with Chris here, and then we'll get connected and get you the people on that. And it'll be, if I remember right, it's two committees. It'll be, usually these proposals go through the Veterans Affairs, the committee dealing with Veterans Affairs, and then they go over to the tax committee, is usually the typical path.
Just one quick question.
Yes, Carla.
The 2023 budget increase, and, so just some of the spending, is this really hard to swallow? Like, the one thing that I have a problem with is that per diem for the tampons in all bathrooms in school. So they'll take a total count of all the kids in school, and then that money is allocated for the total count of kids. But I highly doubt that the tampons are being used in the boys' bathroom. So where does that money go that isn't actually being used for those products?
I will say that that would be number one, a question to ask, number one, your local school district. I will also say that knowing that in 622, a lot of the buildings that they've redone is the bathrooms are all single use, so that instead of having a group of men's and a group of women's,
But
you,
they're still counting it as total students per diem, so there's
Yeah.
money allocated per every student, and I don't think the money that's allocated towards the boys is actually being used on that. So, but you're saying like local school board would?
the local school, I should back up, so make sure people, the question that was being asked is that for the tampon supplies, that the state provides dollars for tampon supplies in all the bathrooms, and that the dollars are figured out per student for both boys and girls. So why is it done that way instead of just on girls? My speculation is the reason they did on that, because if you were doing it just on girls, they would have doubled the amount. They just went as a per student across the board, as that's how they do most of the funding in the schools. They do it as per student. They typically don't look as it is it this gender or that gender. So I'm just saying that's what I'm speculating has happened in that situation.
Okay, and it seems like another really big perk, because I know as a youth going to school, your mom and dad supplied that, but if you had an emergency, they were available at the nurse. So just, again, it's just like our taxes, it it just keeps giving and giving, and everyone has their own families and their own children to provide for, and it's like, Minnesota's almost asking us to provide for everyone's family when we're struggling to provide for our own.
Okay. And what was brought up is it feels like we're giving to everybody else and not taking,
Well, I wanna help people that really need help, but some of
Not-
this frivolous spending, it's like everyone's really hurting right now. We need to like tighten the belt. And it's like, we're like, let's give everyone free lunch, let's give everyone free tampons. So I just think that I wanna help people that if you're really in need and dire help, I want to be there to help you, but I just don't want to give away things that aren't truly needed to sustain life, if that makes sense.
okay. So in other words, basically, if you really need it, you should be able to get it. Otherwise, if people can afford it, we shouldn't be providing it to anybody
Yes.
because we're all hurting right now.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
right, it's a tough time, right?
Okay. Well, thank you for providing your input on that. I appreciate it. Hand up over here, and then we'll go over here.
I volunteer in a nursing home, and I see in the washrooms in the nursing home, they provide tampons and other things in the women's washroom. And I've been seeing that more and more. I don't object to it at all, but I see it more and more publicly in hotels sometimes, in travel places, but in the nursing home they have it. I thought that was interesting. Maybe there's a deal to the state. I don't know, but they provide them for people for free, and you don't have to prove that you're in need. You can just take it what's there.
And in the nursing home, I would imagine most of the residents there are really not.
It's a lot of volunteers.
Okay.
No, so right. So it's come up is that I'm receiving feedback. Somebody was seeing that in the nursing homes that they volunteer in, that tampons are provided free of service in all of the nursing homes that they're at for everybody, whether you're a patient or whether you're a volunteer. I know that one of the things that some of my colleagues have mentioned to me is we provide toilet paper, so they see it as a paper product and it's a disposable paper product. So if we provide toilet paper, why can't we provide tampons? I mean, if we provide toilet paper, I mean, everyone's got toilet paper at home. Why can't we just bring our own toilet paper? So that's kind of, I'm sorry, that's just what I hear from people when they've communicated back and forth to me, and okay, paper product. All right, yes, sir.
Going back to taxes again.
Yep.
Tax relief, going back to what he was talking about. My taxes this year are 12 grand, and they've been going up a ton every year. And I live on the lake here, I'm one of the smallest houses on the lake. So I know people are paying a lot more, 18,000, 20,000, we're fed up with it. We're fed up with it. And last year you had 8 houses for sale, and this year I've seen 4 or 5. They just can't do it anymore, and it's just ridiculous, it's unsustainable. So, here's
It's
an
unsustainable.
example out of Arizona this year. They don't tax my pension, they don't tax my social security, there's no state tax. Are we looking at that at all? Are we looking at ways to do different things here? Because it's outrageous.
Okay, what's being brought up is that the property taxes are unsustainable here. The person has a house on the lake and the taxes have gone out of reach.
Trying to be 18,000.
He's mentioning it'll be 18,000 this year, and he has,
More if they don't.
yes.
I had an assessor out because they had my value too high, okay? We got him to lower the value, but he told me, he says, by the way, he says, your value may go down, but your taxes are probably gonna go up. That's outrageous to me,
Okay,
just outrageous.
all right. So I'm trying to summarize everything here. Yeah, and then the other thing is mentioning is that, that they also spend some time down in Arizona, where they don't get taxed for Social Security.
That's another point.
Right.
Everything is alive down there. There's anything you can do, malls. You come over here to Maplewood Mall, we're shut down over here. We're sure building a lot of high-rise senior livings. They're all around me. I bet you I could count 15 of them. That's a lot of tax money coming in. I know I'm going off into different things, but what happens with the commercial tax money now that you've got empty
Lots of good points being brought up here. We've got a lot of different buildings that have gone up that are senior ones. The mall is struggling, is not as vibrant as it used to be. And there's other commercial places that are vacant, say in the downtowns. I know that in the downtown areas, businesses change how they're doing a lot more at home. And I know one of the things that's being looked at is how we can convert more of those into residences. I know in Minneapolis, the number of people that are working downtown now is over 60,000 people who live downtown. And they're looking for ways to continue to convert places because there's more and more demand for people to live downtown. And they're trying to, and that's one of the things I know from the economic development side that they're looking at is what can be done from the state, from deed, to help find ways to leverage those kind of dollars so that they can renovate buildings to take them from the commercial side and make them into the residential.
Because
Yeah.
I worked down in downtown for 30 years, and I've seen it change
Yeah.
immensely. You walk the skyways now, they're dead.
Yeah.
They're dead. People don't want to go down.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other, not seeing anyone else, so we're getting toward the end here. We're about 20 after, so we're going to end a few minutes early. Yes, sir.
What's gonna be done to get the men out of the women's facilities? So that we just have women being women and girls being girls, and I don't wanna decide one day I'm a girl and walk in and, oh, I should've been one of these a long time ago.
Okay.
It is a little nerving.
Okay, the question that's coming up is on the issue of gender, where, wanting to have people who are just biological males in institutions that are just biological males, and you should not be able to decide, one day I'm a male, one day I'm a female. I will say that having worked in a number of situations where I've run into people who are not always following what their birthright is, I would say that I support where we are right now in terms of people who identify as a certain gender as being respected and treated in that gender. And I will say that it's not something that you just turn on and do overnight and just jump in and out. This is something that when I have been running into these individuals in different situations, they are very much of a situation where it's not something they do on a whim. This is something that is a choice that they do through medical interventions, through mental health. Always starts off with mental health. Many of these folks deal with this for decades. And on top of it, they deal with a lot of hate and violence from the regular community that attack them for who they want to be and who they present themselves as. And when you take somebody in that situation and put them into a situation they don't identify, it increases the chances of violence. I will say that it is not unusual that in parts of our country, there are still laws on the book where that if somebody says they're gay, or if somebody says that they're trans, or if somebody says that they're lesbian, that person could be killed by the person that they've disclosed it to, and that the person who killed them gets off scot-free. Those are the laws in books, and those are defenses that have been used in other parts of the country. I know historically, having looked at what has happened in parts of the country, that many times when people in these communities have been killed, their murders are not even investigated, and they are degraded. And just,
Talk about the women though, the safety of the women, I think you're kind of leaning towards the other side, like for us women that are citizens that do not feel comfortable with that, with going into a restroom and there's a male that's much larger than me, I don't feel safe, I wouldn't send in my daughter in there, it's very uncomfortable, please understand that, and I understand what you're saying, but there needs to be a separate space then or something, but I don't, and even in our sports, it's a female to work very hard her whole high school, right, and get that taken away like that, I hope you'll
There's-
work for us
right.
women, because women, we fought so hard for women to have a right to vote, to have our own, chapter 9 for sports, and it's just like gone, it's gone.
and it's being pointed out that there are women who don't feel safe when they feel there's a man in the bathroom with them. I will say that one of the things that this also leads to is what is the definition of a woman is there are situations where I've heard from, and I've also misgendered people because I thought they were the opposite gender and they were not, is where I've misgendered people who are biological women because I thought they were a guy. So it comes down to is how do you know for sure is that person that next to you what they are? Are we going into a situation where we're doing genital check? That has happened in some states. I hear what you're saying about safety. We want everybody to be safe out there. So it's trying to figure out how do we deal with that? Part of it comes down to should we just have single use? I think 622 I thought came up with a great idea is let's eliminate the gang bathrooms and just have individual single-use bathrooms across the way. That's how you can address some of those type things. I hear you on the safety type of thing. That's some of the things that we have to be creative and figure out how do we move there. And in some instances they are. I know that in some of the newer construction going on, there's more going into doing single person bathrooms instead of gang bathrooms. While it's slightly more expensive, not only does it give you the security there, one of the things, and this, I didn't realize this until I was talking to the folks from 622, is there are weekends where you've got more women because they do a lot of the tournaments there, and you get an all-women's tournament going on. Well, you've got so many women, there aren't enough women's stalls there. They were having to go over, they're all waiting in lines. And so if you've got all these single-use ones, that solves the problem in those kind of situations. So there's ways to get at this, and I think we're, as a society, we're working to get there. And it's one that we want to make sure everybody is safe and everybody's being respected in the process. And I think continued discussions will help guide us there. And that's one of the things I will continue to look at. Last say we're getting at 25 after here, sir.
You see it every night. Last summer, there was a trans pitcher for, I think it was the Columbia Heights team. They won everything. All the girls took second. One guy. And he put all those girls second place. Why does one man rate more than 1 or 10 or 100 women?
No.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And what's being brought up here is there was an instance where in the women's softball, there was one person who was a trans woman who they dominated against everybody else. I would say that I think what we may need to do is, and this came from a person who had offered me another way to take a look at it, because we're doing this in wrestling right now. We have in wrestling is people take a look at what the capabilities are across the board. In other words, weight divisions. So what they do is they take a look as, you don't have somebody who's 250-pound wrestling against somebody who's 100 pounds. So maybe we should instead of, why do we have men and women's sport? Why don't we, the question came to me, which is, and this has been in the last day or so, it's got me thinking, why should we look at that? Why don't we look at capabilities and say, why don't we group people together in the way I say it? Because there are some women out there who do a much better job at things than some men do in some of the sports. And so why don't we take a look, another way to take a look at it, I don't know if we can do that for every sport. They do it in wrestling now, so why don't we take a look at that as another way to do it? Why do we always have to be, it's got to be only men here or women here? Why don't we take a look and try to make it broken down?
Women in high school wrestling.
Yeah.
You don't see them in the big time. NCAA, the freestyles, the women can't anywhere compete with a man. There's girls in here, and there's not one of them I couldn't destroy, even though I'm an old duffer now.
And even
Why
men
don't you
have,
go back
Yeah.
and look at your birth certificate?
Yeah.
If you're born a male, you're a man. And you should go up and be one.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate your feedback and the thoughts on it.
Something else, is it so that you can enjoy it?
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your comments and your thoughts on it. I listen to them all, I hear them all. Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with them all, but I appreciate the continued input. And that's why as I've been talking here and reflecting, as I hear more information, it gives me different ways to think of things as we go forward. I want to, first of all, once again, thank everybody from Little Canada for being here today, for hosting us. It's been great to be out here. I will plan on being out here again. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, and thank you for everyone online for watching us. Thank you. You're welcome.